This is hands down the easiest way to make a makeup bag. There are multiple different methods for sewing a makeup bag, and as someone who has tried and tested them all, let me tell you that not all methods were created equal. In fact, there is one method that reigns champion above them all. I call this method the zipper gap method, and in today's tutorial, I'll be showing you step by step how you can be creating a beautiful boxy makeup bag using this technique. Feel free to check out the link in the description for a free written instruction booklet and some notes about the pattern that you can use. Before we jump into the tutorial, I'll be covering off on why the zipper gap method is the best method in my opinion. I'll also be telling you what you need to create the boxy makeup bag, and then I'll chat a little bit about the sewing pattern that you can use as well. If you just want to jump straight into the tutorial, feel free to use the time stamps below and jump through the video as you please. And by the way, if you're new here, my name is Alex and I post sewing, craft and fashion content here on YouTube, so please follow along if you would like more of that. So why is this the best method? I'm just going to be blunt and tell you straight up why I don't like the other makeup bag methods, and then I'll tell you why the zipper gap method is the best. So firstly, there's the bias tape method. This is where in the process of creating the bag, there are raw edges on the inside and you cover those up with bias binding to finish your bag. The reason I don't like this method is because it's quite finicky using bias binding, particularly for beginners, and also it's added fabric and an added step that you don't need in other methods. The French seam method is where through the process of making a bag, you end up with raw seams on the outside of the bag, and then you basically turn the bag inside out and do a French seam essentially for the edges of the bag. I think this is an interesting and creative technique, and I found it to work quite nicely. Like, it looks quite nice, and the French seam adds quite a bit of stability to the inside of the bag. But the issue with this one is that depending on how many layers of wadding you have, there can be quite a lot of bulk in these seams, and I found that I've broken quite a few needles, which is not ideal. And also you have to be very, very precise, otherwise you can get little bits of the fabric peeking through like that. So it's not a bad option, but definitely not my favorite. I also find that because of the French seam, it's not very intuitive if you want to scale the makeup bag pattern. So that's not ideal. Another method is the bottom seam method, and this is where you have two rectangular pattern pieces, and then when sewing the makeup bag, you'll leave a gap at the bottom where you can pull the bag through. This is probably quite simple for beginners, and you can definitely use this if you would like. But this just means that you have seams at the bottom of the bag, which I like to avoid if possible. And also the lining fabric isn't technically attached to the outer fabric, so the structure of the bag isn't as good. So what about the zipper gap method? Well, I'll show you it properly later, but basically it involves leaving a gap between the top zipper and the lining fabric, and then you can use that to pull the bag through later, and then you finish that top seam. If that doesn't make sense yet, then don't worry, you can follow along through the rest of this video. But what you need to know is that this method doesn't involve bias binding. It has perfectly finished seams on the outside and inside. There isn't a seam at the bottom. It isn't too finicky, and I don't break needles using this method. And also adjusting the pattern is relatively intuitive if you need to do that as well. So that's why it's my favorite method. Let's get into what you need to sew this bag. You need one piece of fabric for the outside of the bag, and I would recommend using a woven fabric like a cotton or a linen, and then also one piece of fabric for the lining of the bag, and same here, cotton or linen is best. If you've made this makeup bag a few times, then feel free to experiment with the type of fabric that you use, but definitely just starting out, those are the ones that I would recommend. The only other thing that you need is a zipper for your bag. I use this number 5 zipper. It is nylon so that I can sew over it. If you want to use a metal zipper, that's fine. Just make sure you sew some little zipper tabs on the edge of your zipper so that you don't need to sew over it and that you don't risk breaking a needle. You should never sew over a metal zipper with a sewing machine. All right, those are the main things that you need to sew the bag. I will say if you want to create a bit of poof in your bag like this, then you will want to put wadding. in your bag. And then you'll want to quilt the outside of your bag. I've already pre-quilted this fabric and I've used 2 layers of cotton wadding. So you can use polyester wadding if you want the maximum fluff and maximum bounce in your makeup bag, but I try to avoid using polyester when possible because it is plastic, but also I quite like the double layer of cotton wadding. It gives a really nice feel to the bag. I think there's enough stability, but also you can easily just smush the bag if you need, which I think is handy if you're going traveling and you need to just shove it into another bag or into a suitcase or something like that. Now for constructing the bag, I generally use Wonder clips, but you can also use pins as well if you want to. My normal scissors, fabric scissors, some little snips, a heat erasable fabric marker, and then a ruler and also the pattern. So I'll just speak a little bit about the pattern for the makeup bags. Generally, makeup bag patterns either come like this, or like this. I don't like to use this one because this is the one that creates the seam at the bottom of the bag, and that's not the technique that I like to use. So I would either recommend using this one or this one. In this tutorial, I'll use the singular rectangle pattern because I think that's the easiest to customize the shape if you want to alter the shape of the bag in the future. And it's also the easiest to cut. But if you are batch making makeup bags for a small business, for example, you might want to do this one because with this pattern, you do all of the cutting in one step at the start, whereas there is a little bit of cutting in the middle of the method for using this pattern. I also like using the rectangles because it's easy to cut them out in cardboard in whatever size you need. So I have a small, medium, and large pattern that I use, and check out the link in the description for the free PDF download where I provide all of the measurements that I use and some written instructions for putting the makeup bag together. All right, that's enough about the pattern and the things that you need. Let's just jump straight into it. Okay, so you have your front fabric piece, which is already quilted. You have your lining piece. If you want to add a bit more stabilization to this, feel free to put some interfacing on, but I've just left it as is for the minute. And then you also have your zipper. The first thing that we're going to do is fold this in half, and then we're just going to mark this center seam, and that's for future. Make sure you mark it on the wrong side of the fabric. And do that for both the lining piece and for the main fabric. So you're just folding it along the longest edge in half. And you're marking that center point. Now we are going to start sewing. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your outer fabric down, then you'll get your zip, put your zip face down so that when you sew it, it's the right way. And then you're going to get your lining fabric and you will put your lining fabric face down as well so that the two fabric pieces are right sides together. And then you just want to make sure that they're nice and lined up like so, and then you can do some clips. Now we can turn the machine on, and we're going to be sewing 1 centimeter seam allowance along this edge. And this is the point where if you have a zipper foot, you should swap it out until a zipper foot. So I'm going to do that now. Some people can get away with sewing zippers without using a zipper foot. So if that's you, then lucky you. But otherwise, this will just help you get a really nice seam. So I'm just going to place the zipper foot down, and then we can start sewing. And I'll generally use a 3mm stitch length for this bag, and all seam allowances are 1 centimeter. So cool, let's get sewing. We'll just sew this down and make sure you backstitch as well. Now pay attention to where the zipper is, because once you get there, it can create a bit of bulk. So you'll just want to slide the zipper past the foot, and then you can continue sewing. Great, so you've done your first seam. Now we're going to flip that over and we're going to top stitch along this seam just to finish it. So I normally change the stitch length to 5 for this, just so it's a bit more decorative. Just make sure you're pulling the fabric so that it's nice and even on both sides. I will often put my zipper foot on the other side to this, just to create a bit of extra stability. Just so as close as you want to the edge. Keeps the fabric in place, but it's also a bit of an aesthetic thing at this point. And there you go, you have a really nice, beautiful seam along the top. Now, the next step is where the zipper gap method comes in. So rather than replicating that exact process for the other side of the zip, we're going to do one bit at a time. So we're just going to do the top fabric first. So you'll just simply fold that up like that, and then sew your zip 1 centimeter across, and just make sure that the edges are nice and lined up, and make sure you reduce your stitch length again if you need to. All right, so we're sewing our 1 centimeter seam allowance. Make sure you back stitch. And again, make sure you're aware of where the zipper is so that you can pull it through as needed. Great, so now you've finished that seam and you've created a nice loop with the outside layer of the bag. Now what we're going to do is create a loop with the lining fabric. So basically do the same thing, fold the lining fabric up, line it up, and then we're going to sew along this edge, but we're not going to sew along the whole length. We're going to leave a gap in the middle. So we'll just sew a little bit here and then a little bit here, and make sure it's a decently sized gap so that when we get to the end stages of our bag, you have room to pull it through. So we're still doing the 1 centimeter seam allowance, and make sure you back stitch as usual. So I've sewn a little bit along the top, but I'm going to leave a big gap, and I might just use this opportunity to push the zip through. I've sewn a big gap, and now I want to just close off this end as well. Make sure you back stitch, and there you have it. So basically we've also created a nice loop for the lining fabric with the zip, but there is this hole here which later we will use to pull the fabric through. Now we're going to create a little bit of a sandwich with the bag. So what we're going to do is we're going to flatten out the bag like this, and you're going to want to line the zip up with that marking that we made earlier, which shows the center of the bag, just like that. And then you're going to do the same with the lining fabric. Line that marking up with the zip, and then you're going to want to clip everything in place. And then make sure you do this for the other side as well. Line it up. Make sure that's lined up as well on the back. And then clip in place. Beautiful. Now we're going to do a simple stitch down each edge of the makeup bag. So we don't need our zipper foot anymore, so I'll just take this one off and replace it with the standard foot. By the way, if you wanted to put any zipper tabs on your makeup bag, you just insert them in the center there. To be honest, I don't find them that practical, so I'm happy to just have a standard makeup bag without all of those bells and whistles. All right, let's sew. Again, I'm using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And this is the part where if you were using a metal zipper, you would want to have the zipper tabs there because you can't just sew straight over the zipper, whereas because it's nylon, here I can. Also the other side down now as well. All right, now's the part where we need to do a little bit of cutting. So we basically want to cut out 4 little squares out of each corner. And I have pre-prepared these little cardboard cutouts for each of my bag sizes. So since I'm sewing small today for this tutorial, I will use this 3 centimeter squared cardstock. And what you're going to do is you're going to place the card in each corner. Make sure you line it up with the seam allowance, not with the edge of the fabric. So don't do that. Do that, line it up with the seam allowance. And then I like to trace around the corner with a pen. And then do this for all of the corners. This is the part where if you'd use this pattern for the makeup bag, you wouldn't have to do any cutting steps here. But I find it a lot easier just to cut out these little corners rather than do the indent in the other pattern. Hopefully what I'm saying makes sense. I feel like it can get a little bit confusing. Amazing. So now we have all 4 corners drawn, and then we can just use our fabric scissors and cut them out. I find that using this method as well means that you know that this side and this side are the exact same length. So it means there's a lot less room for error when sewing the bag together. Awesome, so now we have cut all of the corners out. Now we can get back to sewing. Because we cut off these seams, I like to just go back and sew over them again to provide some extra stability, making sure I backstitch over it. And you can even go over the zipper a few times just to make sure everything is nice and strong. We'll do that for the other side as well. All right, now is the hardest part, I think, of making this bag. We basically want to puff these corners out and then sew them together. And bear with me because it kind of creates a really big scruffy ball of fabric and it does not look like a bag at all. But if you follow through to the end, you'll see how it miraculously turns into this beautiful, beautiful bag. So yeah, be patient, and it might be a bit tricky on your first go, but once you get used to it and you know what it looks like, then it will start to make sense. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to fold the outside fabric so it's flat like this, and then we want to put the lining fabric on top of it. I don't really know how to explain this very well, so you'll have to just watch me and fiddle around with it yourself. But basically, in the end, and I use clips because I find that is the most helpful. In the end, you're going to end up with the corners flat on top of each other. Just like that. And then you sew down 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then you repeat for all 4 corners of the bag. And I like to sew them one at a time because putting clips on all of them first would just make it quite difficult. But you can give it a go if you think that will be easier for you. So again, just make sure you backstitch, and if you want really sharp corners, make sure you go right off the edge of the fabric there. So that's what it will look like at the end. And if the fabric's a little bit messy there, don't worry about it. As long as you've caught everything in there and there's no gaps, then it'll look nice in the finished product. So now we'll do that for another corner. And you can already see that there's quite a few layers of fabric here with the double wadding. So if you are using a domestic machine that can't get through too many layers of fabric, make sure that you go really slowly and maybe even trial the bag with just 1 layer of wadding to begin with. And this is also another reason why you definitely don't want to be doing French seams through this many layers of fabric, because you will break a needle. So that's why this method is a bit better. Also, full disclaimer, I'm not sure why I picked the smallest bag for the tutorial, because I definitely think it's the most difficult because all of the seams are closer together and it's just a bit fiddly. So again, just check that there's going to be no gaps anywhere and then it should be okay. It's not the neatest thing ever, but it ends up looking neat at the end, and that's the main thing. So that's probably the best corner that I've sewed, because I managed to keep this quite straight compared to some of the other ones. But that's the thing, is the more you do it, the better you get at it. All right, on to our final corner, if we can manage to pull it around. You do have to wrestle with the fabric a bit to figure out how to do this. All right. I think that seems pretty lined up, so I'm just going to put it straight under, because I'm feeling lucky or crazy. Awesome. So now we've done the final corner, and as you can see, this just looks like a complete smush. Like, that does not look like a bag at all. But what you're going to do is you're just going to kind of move the fabric around until you can locate that zipper opening. All right, here we go. So you can see the right side of the lining fabric. So obviously the opening is in there. And I probably didn't create a big enough gap, so it's a little bit difficult to push through. So you're just going to want to take your time here so you don't rip the seam. But there you go. You can see that I'm starting to push the bag through. Keep going, and then voila! You can see that's an inside out bag. So I'll just open the zipper up. You can flip it inside out. And look, we're creating the mini bag. So we still need to make sure that we cut any loose threads off, and we want to really push these corners out as best that you can, like this. And then we have one more step, which is to go and do the top stitching on this side, because we remember we already did that on there to start with. Just going to cut this thread off. I have seen a few loose threads, so I'm just going to go around and get those. It's good to just do a little quality check. There we go, here's a little one. Same, just check on the inside that all of the edges have been caught, but this is looking good. Just get this off. All right, so now we are going to do this top stitching down the edge, and we just want to make sure that we fold this over adequately like that, and then we will sew it so that it catches all of that. And I'll just put a few clips in here just to help us make sure we catch everything. And I would recommend using a zipper foot again for this last step, given we're close to the zipper. Back stitch, and again, I've moved my stitch length up to 5 so it matches that side as well. I just think for visible stitching, it's nice to have a longer stitch length because that makes it look really pretty. All right, so remember you want to be watching underneath as you sew to make sure that you capture everything. And just go really slowly with this, because you want to make sure that the bag is closed properly. And again, this is like a lot fiddlier when it's a smaller bag compared to a bigger bag. Sometimes I like to start flipping the bag inside out just to get over that last little bit. And back stitch, and you're done. pull that out and then just check on the inside that you've caught everything well. Looks like I have. And you can push your bag and there you have it, your finished little pouch. Yay! So exciting. And I love this little mini size. It literally fits in the palm of your hands. Like this could be really cute for sewing notions or things like that. Or like keys and lip balm, anything really. So that's the final bag. I hope that you love it. As I've said a few times, check out the link in the description below to get the exact measurements that I use. I have a large size, I have the mini size, which I sewed today, and I also have a medium size. So yeah, you can sew to your heart's content. You can make heaps of these. They're really good as gifts and they're also just good to have around the house to keep little notions in, or I put some of my YouTube tech gear in there to keep it nice and protected, and I really love them and I think you're going to too. Let me know in the description if you've tried sewing these makeup bags and how it went, or what project that you're currently working on. If you enjoyed sewing these makeup bags, then you would definitely like creating celebration bunting. So do check out this video as well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.